Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our construction breakout panel on the future outlook for key construction and design sectors. I am Philip Ross, the leader of Anchin's architecture, engineering, and construction industry groups. On this panel, you'll hear a range of perspectives on how New York's construction and design leaders have adapted to the unprecedented challenges of COVID-19, as well as how these leaders are strategizing for the rebound and long-term growth. These are some of the most influential minds behind some of the New York area's most innovative firms, doing public and private work across a range of sectors. I look forward, as I'm sure you all do, to hearing how they have led their firms through this challenging period and what they're seeing in the year ahead. It's often said that COVID didn't change the industry as much as it accelerated changes that were already starting. There is a lot of truth to this. We've seen new industries growing alongside New York's traditionally dominant residential and office markets, such as life sciences, healthcare, logistics, industrial, and data centers. As a result, design and construction firms across the area are diversifying to meet these new needs. COVID, of course, didn't create the demand overnight for biotech, local manufacturing, e-commerce, or secure server space, but it certainly created heightened levels of interest that are unlikely to subside for the foreseeable future. This kind of diversification will ultimately be healthy for New York's built environment. This was all a sudden shock to the system, but the innovation we're seeing in safety, efficiency, and repositioning to deliver projects in these ascendant industries has been inspiring. Construction and design firms are working to move forward safely on much needed projects and initiatives that were underway before the pandemic as well. Commercial and residential projects, from new smart office buildings in Midtown to housing throughout the boroughs, are needed to meet New York's still expected population growth and new corporate tenants. Energy and infrastructure projects were a pressing concern before COVID, and that hasn't changed in spite of new funding concerns. Funding for public and private projects overall are a question mark, especially with more conservative lending and substantially decreased tax revenues. The takeaway is we can't dial the clock back to before COVID, but while there will be some things that change, it's also important to retain an even-handed perspective on the future. More than a century ago, the famous writer O. Henry said about the city, "It'll be a great place if they ever finish it." Well, New York is change, and the design and construction industries have been at the heart of it. So without further ado, I'd like to turn things over to today's guests. Dave Gockel, President and CEO of Langen Engineering, Tony Mann, President and CEO of EJ Electric Installation Company, Guy Geyer, Managing Partner for FX Collaborative, and Everett Martin, President of Broadway Construction Group. So let's start with each panelist giving their perspective on the industry and what they see for key sectors. Dave, would you like to start? I think you're on mute.
I didn't know I was allowed to control my mute, so. Anyhow, hello to you and all our attendees. It's been interesting. Look, we're in all the major cities across the country, and I think what we're seeing in New York is pretty endemic to what we're seeing in many of our other major cities. We've certainly taken a kick in the teeth, but we're incredibly resilient, and New York City will bounce back. We saw it after 9/11. We saw it after the Wall Street collapse and the Great Recession, and we will see it after the pandemic. I think, a real big question right now is, when are people going to feel safe and comfortable using mass transit? When are people going to be comfortable using vertical transportation? And with remote work being such a big part of the business model, what is the future of the office market? You touched on some other items, Phil, with the loss of revenue and tax revenues. New York City has dug itself a deep hole here. The feds are going to help, but it's a big hole, and it's going to take some time to get out of it. We see the biggest, obviously you've got the housing, NYCHA, and all this other stuff going on, and we've got some major transportation and infrastructure projects, which we'll talk about later in the program. But we also think there are a lot of players that are new to the dance with regard to real estate, and those are e-commerce, data centers, and life sciences, and they're all incredibly strong. And some of their stories are not so much right here in Manhattan, but some of their stories are in the outer boroughs and the areas surrounding Manhattan. But we're still seeing, a lot of strength in those markets, and we'll touch on them later. But no need for despair. We see a lot of good things out there.
That's good to hear. Thank you, Dave. Tony, how about you?
Great. I'll jump in and thanks. I appreciate the optimistic view, and Dave, your comments about New York always bouncing back, which I truly believe in. This past year has been difficult for everyone. We're all waiting for the vaccine to roll through and the good weather to come this summer so that we can get back to normal, which I think will be September. What we've seen is a huge drop in construction starts. So typically work continued, some stuff stopped, but very little in our markets. And we have seen though that the big jobs didn't get going. So you look at the MTA. The MTA was the largest builder in America, $55 billion plan. And they went to almost nothing right now because of their revenues. You look at commercial work, Dave was mentioning, and you were talking about, New York, the people aren't here. That's dried up. And aviation, that was booming also. Major builds out at JFK, delayed, not stopped. All this stuff is just delayed. So where I see the hit in the city is going to be, work's finishing up through midway through this year. And then the work that normally would have started last year, you're going to see midway through this year a slowdown in the construction business on starts. And it'll take another year from now for things to start to catch up, because things will slow down. And I mirror what Dave was saying about the markets. You see healthcare, which we're a big player in. Everyone was focused on COVID, and now they're focusing on healthcare and what's the next step for them to be able to respond to all this in the future. So that's going to be a big driver to the market, as well as life sciences. And industrial is just still ramping up continually right through the pandemic. And you're mentioning mission critical, and then the power business, all the renewables and transmission distribution. That's is going and is going to keep driving us forward. And we're looking forward to the feds coming through with a stimulus package that's really going to drive the state city work, the MTA, the Port Authority, and all that. So I think there's going to be a dip here still coming, but I also am encouraged for the future of our city and the area for really growing. So thanks.
Great. Thank you, Tony. Guy?
Thanks, Phil, and good morning, everybody. So obviously this has been a challenging year with all of the kinds of challenges that we have had to face with national health crisis, international health crisis, and the economy and the impact of social justice causes precipitated by the George Floyd shooting, and that all has ended up obviously to create a tough world. But I'm an architect, and architects are by definition optimistic people. We look to the future. We hope we can help solve these problems. So I think that we have a lot of opportunity ahead of us. We've already seen a few little green shoots. I just read that the leasing was up in January for the first time since last March. So that's an encouraging sign. But I think we do, as Tony and David had already said, there are great opportunities with infrastructure and transportation. I think there are opportunities that if we can get zoning changes and other use group changes to convert some of the office space that we have that's underutilized and will be underutilized into residential, that's a fabulous opportunity. We certainly have to address climate change, which fortunately is now back on the agenda in Washington. So the application of new technologies for that. The science and healthcare market in New York, I think, is going to be a boom as it goes. There are a lot of challenges there also for zoning and building use changes, but we can do it. Affordable housing has got to be on the agenda at the top of the list, both on a national basis, but most importantly in New York City, where housing costs have been out of control for so many years. And I think building affordable housing is critical. And getting back to work, into workplace that's different than it was before, and not necessarily less workplace, but just different kinds of workplace, and recognizing that the way we work is going to be different than the way we have. And really overlaying all of this is really a need to recognize frankly, the failure of our industry and in many ways society to recognize the issues around justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, and that these issues have to be addressed proactively. We can't keep talking about it. We've got to do it. And that's got to come to play in how we design buildings, how we plan neighborhoods and cities, and how we hire and people that we work with every day has got to be part of that equation.
Great, thank you, Guy. And now, Everett, let's hear from you.
Thank you, Phil. Good morning to the panelists and to all the attendees. Thank you for this opportunity. I certainly support and embrace everything that everyone has said. The economy has certainly taken a hit. I mean, nationally, we have seen approximately about a 6.5 to a 7.5 contraction nationally. I think New York has been hit a little bit harder because of its density and the complexity as to how we operate as a construction sector within the industry. But for sure, with the diversification that are happening throughout the city, and more so from the state level, there's certainly a great hope here for us to rebound. I think the biggest picture, not to repeat what all the panelists have said, is that we have to focus on how do we create demand, because it's really about demand and supply, right? And I think we have to, certainly heighten our sensitivity towards getting people back to work and getting people comfortable with coming back to the city. I think that in itself will certainly propel the need for more office spaces and certainly more apartment complexes, whether it's affordable income or mixed use or, market rate. But for sure, the projects that, we're seeing that are happening, that are in the pipeline have been set back by this whole pandemic. But the developers and certainly at the state level are all poised and moving forward. So I'm very confident that we're going to see all these jobs that are paused are going to be coming back later on in 2021 and with a full-blown speed ahead in 2022. On the diversity side, I mean, we have to focus on all the e-commerce, the data center that are coming up. These are things that were already, behind the scene working, propelled at a certain speed, and certainly their need are now more eminent to the betterment of our society at large, and more specifically for New York. So I'm confident that things are going to change quickly. What we have to do is to get our kids back to school, get the vaccine propelled to every individual, and get people with a comfort in mind to coming back to work.
Great, thank you, Everett. I like your confidence there. So now, in talking about different areas, so e-commerce, and a lot of people mentioned e-commerce has really had a significant effect on retail. Everyone saw this, and now we have more need for warehouse space, as well as the freight issues and transportation issues, et cetera. So what do you see for this related to the sector for construction and design, especially this year and going forward? I know Langen is very involved with this. So Dave, do you want to touch on it?
Sure, Phil. Be glad to take that one. It's incredible. You started out with some comments, I think, about how COVID has taken, perhaps 5 years of progress and compressed it into a single year. And I think, in no sector is that more evident than in the e-commerce sector, not just here in New York, but across the country. It's interesting, just quick, from Langen's perspective, 5 years ago, I think we did, $5 million in revenues in e-commerce. Last year in 2019, we did 27 million. We thought we were going to do, 32 million in fees. And instead of going from 27 to 32, we actually went from 27 to 54. That's, a result of the demand. That's not simply in the New York market, but across the country. But it has been incredible because, COVID took everybody and they forced us to be online shoppers, right? What's been interesting about that is all of the growth trends for the next 5 years were really based on additional usage by more or less, current users and younger people who are getting into the purchasing mode. A lot of those models presume there was an entire demographic slice of the pie that was never going to buy on e-commerce. And what COVID did was it captured them by force, and everybody became an e-commerce shopper. So just think about that for a moment. The other thing that happened was you suddenly everybody realized that just-in-time logistics doesn't really work that well. And now there's a demand for inventory, which did not exist a year ago. So we have, multiple different forces that are driving this growth. So what does that mean statistically? In 2020, the e-commerce industry grew by 44% in the United States, 44%. Yet it only represents 20% of all retail sales. So that tells us, it's never going to capture 100% of retail sales, but it is going to capture a bigger and bigger piece of the pie as it goes forward. Now, I sense it hasn't been, high on the radar screen in the center of the New York market because a lot of these warehouse facilities and whatnot, were New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Long Island. But with the just-in-time delivery, with Amazon, with people wanting something right away, it has dramatically impacted what's going on in the New York City market. Quick example, 5 years ago, there were no, new multi-story warehouses being constructed. There was some reutilization of some things, but nobody envisioned building a new multi-story warehouse. 3 years ago, the first one went up in Seattle. This past year, we've been involved with 5 in the boroughs of Manhattan, 5 multi-story warehouses, which is something that was just viewed as not economically viable. And we're seeing them pop up all over the place. In addition, what is happening in Manhattan are the last mile delivery facilities for Amazon and others. So we're seeing the repurposing of existing space. We're seeing the reuse of existing space. We're seeing the reuse of parking garage space for last mile facilities. So I do think that, this wave of e-commerce that has been taking the nation by storm is really having a dramatic impact right here in New York City. You may not see the big box stuff, so to speak. You're not going to see it in Manhattan, obviously, but you will see the last mile delivery facilities in Manhattan. And if you get to the outer boroughs, the amount of e-commerce activity is staggering, and it's going to be good for the design profession. It's going to be great for the construction profession, and it's going to be great for jobs as well.
Excellent, very encouraging, Dave. Any of the other, Tony or Guy or Everett, any other thoughts on the perspective?
I'll jump in. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Tony. Go ahead.
Okay, I'll go. So on e-commerce, yeah, it's been really interesting to watch the industrial and warehouse just take off. And Dave had, the statistics of the great growth. My market research consists of when I go home from work at night, I look in front of our front door and see all the Prime packages stacked up. And I know the percentage it's gone up. But seriously, we've actually done a lot for even Amazon, and these are fast track projects ranging from, we've done Staten Island, and we have an office in Syracuse, building a new facility up there, one of the smaller ones, 200,000 square feet. But in Staten Island, they needed to get it open for, Thanksgiving, for the Christmas rush, 250,000 square feet in 3 months. Fit it out, get it ready, and that's what we're seeing, these fast track and new construction up in Syracuse. Again, fast track, they want it up. Once they make the plan and the commitment, they want to get their partners to get it going. So we see that as just continuing as this huge growth happens. And one other side, the retail is still a substantial portion, as Dave was saying, but it's shrinking. And opportunity, though, that comes out of that is, what's happening to all these malls? A lot of them are closing, and they're being repurposed, which is opportunity for the design and construction field into everything from universities are taking them over. We see them becoming office space, some even warehouse space, but they're opportunities because people are starting to be creative with them. A lot of these malls have good locations. That's how they were set up, close to large populations. And they're, totally having to do a lot of work. You can't just, open something up in a mall right away. You've got to do a lot of work when you think about it. So we see that as an opportunity in addition to all the industrial sector.
Great, thank you. Everett?
Yeah, for sure, Tony and Dave. I mean, the reality is, again, I know I don't want to repeat myself, but it's all about supply and demand. I mean, we're seeing that, the millenniums are actually the guys who are boosting the online shopping, right? These are the guys who on their app, on their phone, are buying things. They're used to going online. They're focusing on buying things directly online. So the demand there is certainly there, right? So we're taking away from all the local retail stores, and we're losing on the construction side from that perspective. But certainly with that demand and that need for storage facilities, for local distribution centers, it's also going to create opportunities for us to grow that sector in the construction industry. So one drops, but one is rising, maybe, and hopefully. And it's unfortunate because I hate to see businesses go out of business, but the reality is all the malls are shutting down, all the local stores. Lord & Taylor's are out of business. As a major, player in the retail market, to see them go out of business, it's very sad. But it's just where the pendulum is shifting, the paradigm has shifted, and we just have to be prepared to flow with it. The fact of the matter is that, we're going to see, because of the need, which drives the demand, we're going to see a lot of these e-commerce businesses just booming up and building local facilities. And hopefully we'll see more, not only in the outer boroughs, but also in Manhattan. I mean, we're at BCG, we're very diverse within the entire city, so we'll go anywhere to work. But certainly we'd love to see more of that happening in New York City, in Manhattan specifically, than also in the outer boroughs. Obviously, if you want to go cheap, land space there in the outer boroughs are much less expensive, so it's easy to capitalize and repurpose a site and build out of the ground. There's not much out of the ground remaining that are zoned to accommodate these warehouses. So certainly they have to take on pre-existing buildings and reformat those to create and satisfy those needs. But definitely, I live in New Jersey. It's blowing up in New Jersey. I hear my friends down in PA, in Philadelphia, they're experiencing the same thing. So this is a good systemic, opportunistic growth sector for the industry. And, we're preparing for the inevitable.
Great, thank you. It's encouraging when Tony talked about how fast-track these are, that hopefully these can fill in some of the gaps for the backlog that maybe isn't there and the bidding that didn't happen so far. So let's hope. So life sciences and healthcare, obviously there's been a lot of activity in these sectors, both for permanent work and for the temporary facilities. You have new groups such as Build Bios that focus on promoting these. So, so how are you seeing these evolve this year? And can these also fill in and take up some of the slack, or is this going to be more of a longer term process? Guy, I think you mentioned this in your opening remarks as well.
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, I truly believe from all the activity that I've seen that the life science market in New York, not, in all the boroughs really in New York is going to be a tremendous growth opportunity for the design and construction field, but obviously for the economy in New York. There is a lot to do in terms of trying to get codes and zoning and other regulations sorted out so that it could be more accommodating to life sciences. But there's been a lot of work already done in that regard, and I think we're making good progress. And I think, New York Builds Bio, as Mitch in the previous segment, Mitch Simpler talked about that too. I think just the growth of the numbers of people involved in that group has been really remarkable. So I do see that as a significant factor. And of course, the healthcare industry in New York has always been very strong, both in terms of patient care, but also in research. And I think we'll see a lot more research and development going on in New York as well as things go forward. So it definitely has a tremendous positive impact to the economy in New York and the AEC community as well.
Thank you. And Tony, I know you've always done healthcare work and work for hospitals. So what do you see? And do you see maybe being more in these temporary type facilities or more permanent facilities, or you see being just a mix?
So before I jump into healthcare, life sciences just excites me about the future. And it's a long-term play, but a short-term play. You see people like Deerfield, right in Midtown Manhattan, building an incubator for future life science companies. So with the incubator here, they're going to grow in New York and fill out the other spaces that are being built. So real excited about that. But back to your question about healthcare, both temporary and permanent. I mean, we built over 1,500 beds for COVID in everything from tents to existing hospitals. And, that was fast track. But the long-term play here is the hospitals are upgrading. They realized their limitations when they were put to the test during COVID and realized what they needed to do for the long term. And that ranges from things like HVAC system upgrades. They've got to augment their air filtration systems and allow them to isolate parts of their buildings, whether it's by room, by floor. They've got to be able to isolate it for future COVID. So there's a lot of work that goes in when you need to upgrade those systems. They've also realized a lot of them had emergency power systems that just were not built for the needs that they had to add rooms. People converted psych rooms to COVID rooms, and their emergency power wasn't set up. So we see a lot of emergency power upgrades, and these are major projects at hospitals, all across the city. And what we see them designing also is for flexibility. So they're redesigning, bringing design professionals in and really looking at what their future needs are, because they need to be flexible. The floor may be changed, a wing of a hospital may be changed to a different purpose on an emergency basis. So they've got to set themselves up so that they can do that in the future. So we see, now that they don't have the overload from COVID patients, they're really thinking long-term and what they need to do. And healthcare is a market that is always there, the needs are there, and now they're going to, elective surgeries were put on hold a lot during COVID because people didn't want to be in a hospital, those will, the ones that were backed up will now start to go, which gives the healthcare institutions the profitability that they need to do the future projects. So we see this as a market that's really going to take off this year.
Great, thank you. Everett, Dave, any additional comments?
Yeah, the ecosystem from life science really, coming out of 2020 has really seen a great impact on moving forward and becoming, more innovative in developing and solving problems that are futuristic or likely to occur. I mean, the venture capitalists are investing from left and right because primarily, in part, hopefully out of their belief, but more so from the opportunistic return on their investment. They see an opportunity here to, get a better return long term. But like most of these solutions that do come to the forefront, they do take time. They do take research and testing to eventually bring forth a product that will solve a problem. So, I do see life science opportunities from, construction expectation perspective to continue to grow in 2021. I think it will remain above average when compared year over year between 2018 through 2019 into 2020. And I think it's going to continue to grow. We do anticipate some, modernization and valuation. The number of transactions this year as other, industries recover. But, I believe that life science as a whole, and specifically biotechnology, I mean, that's up on the horizon and certainly will continue to grow. And, America on a whole is also, taking a lead in developing and expanding on life science. So, locally, I, one of our developers is looking to, he was looking to do a 23-story building in the outer boroughs. And I guess because of financing the deal, may not have been, likely. And there's a lot of interest in converting that site to life science. So, while they don't need a 23-story building, they probably need a podium of maybe 4 or 5 floors. And on top of that, we could extend a tower and create some sort of mixed-use building. So there'll be a lot of different opportunities and different dynamics that's going to make this work, I believe, in the city. And certainly with the Biden administration support and belief in science and their appropriation of funds from the state level, from the federal level into the state and down to the city, I'm sure we're going to experience some of these growth. And, we're looking forward to it.
Thank you, thank you.
Phil,
Dave, any?
Yeah, if I may just add a couple comments there, maybe fill in some gaps. Just, for context, okay, if we look at, and I'm going to talk about life sciences because I think that's a little bit more, it's new and exciting. We're do a tremendous amount of healthcare work, but so does everybody else. If we're looking at, what's impacting the market here in New York, just from a context perspective, nationally, commercial laboratory space was up 12% last year, and it's on pace to increase at least that much this year. So we're seeing a lot of activity. The big hubs are Boston, San Francisco, and San Diego. We're active in the first two, but not so much in San Diego, as are Pittsburgh and Houston. But New York is catching up. It's gaining a lot of ground, and I think all of us can continue to see a lot of activity there. There is a event coming up. I believe it is June 12th, which is the New York Build Bio. Again, New York Build Bio. It's a life sciences initiative that consists of academia, tenants, healthcare development execs. So people should pay attention to that and get it on their calendar. But New York City is certainly a talent hub for this industry. And I think New York City's position within the industry is going to continue to advance over the years to come.
Thank you, thank you. So now maybe to shift gears a little bit, we hear about the need for infrastructure. We hear about some major projects. The new administration's talked about it. We have Schumer there who's talking about it. We do have some major projects in our, I'll call it our own neighborhood, our own backyard, such as Gateway and Midtown West. And Gateway's been languishing a little bit, and Midtown West we've heard a lot about. So what does the group think is a realistic time frame for each of these to start? And regarding Gateway, there's been a lot of debate. Governor Cuomo has said that it can be done without shutting down service. There's a lot of groups that think you need to shut down service. So just want to throw it out there for someone who wants to start just to discuss about what they see with these projects and what the potential likelihood and time frame could be, because these could have a huge effect on our industry.
Well, from my perspective, Gateway is definitely back on the table with the Biden administration and their commitment to spending money on infrastructure. I think that will be restarted very soon. And as far as having to shut down service, I actually think that the new tunnels can be done while the two existing tunnels are in operation, but time is of the essence, because the two existing tunnels were damaged going back to Sandy, and they were in deteriorating shape before that. And as a commuter coming in from New Jersey, I know all too well the difficulties of that. So the new tunnels need to be done so that the old ones can be restored and fixed. So, but all of that is also supporting the need to expand Penn Station. Penn Station's daily usage is I don't know, 600,000 people a day, and it was designed for 200,000 people. So the Gateway tunnels need to be built just to support that, and Penn Station needs to be also upgraded. There are additional, we've been part of the master planning process for Penn Station to expand its capacity, especially now that Amtrak and Long Island Railroad's been moved across to Moynihan. So I think that project needs to go forward. I think the governor is certainly behind that, but as Empire Station expands, we're adding additional platforms to the block south of existing Penn Station. All of that will make Penn Station a more successful hub for transportation in the city, and the development that can occur as a result of that around Penn Station. So I'm very optimistic about that moving forward.
So I echo that for sure. I think, with the Biden administration and their support, the project is going to go forward. But I think there's also potentially some constraints, right? Because the limited amount of resources that these respective states have, New Jersey and New York, depending on how much they have to contribute towards the project, may also delay the start. I do think, from a capacity standpoint, very shortly, if we're not there already, that there is truly a demand for it. Having the two existing tunnels restored, whether it's concurrent or, subsequently to the new ones going in, is certainly a need. That in itself will propel our future and certainly create a sense of sustainability of the anticipated demand that's coming down the stream. So the project itself is a good project. I'm not in the infrastructure business from that perspective, but I might get into it for that reason, because I think it's going to be a big project, and certainly it's going to open up a lot of employment opportunities for a lot of people between states.
Any other thoughts?
Yeah, Phil, if I may, look, infrastructure is always good, right? It's not just about the project itself, but it's about the development and the quality of life, that it drives going forward. Just recently, Moynihan Train Hall opened. We got LaGuardia Airport. We got Terminal 1 at Newark Airport. So, a lot of great stuff there. I don't know how many folks who are here today, are involved in New York City Building Congress, but they've been a tremendous advocate for these projects. The Gateway, Second Avenue Subway, and many, many others. But the sense is these are going to happen, right? These are going to happen. No one wants to tell you when, but I think that the politics behind funding them are in order. The biggest challenge, I think, is the ability of the local states and transit agencies to come up with any matching funding. They're in a big hole. And, on this topic of infrastructure, I think that the deficits that these state and local agencies face are going to introduce more private-public partnerships, P3 projects, which had been beaten up lately in the media, but I think we're going to see more opportunity for that. And what you may also see is, and I've heard this term multiple times, is that many of these public transportation agencies, whether they're turnpikes or rail agencies like New Jersey Transit or LIRR, they are asset rich, but revenue poor. Asset rich, but revenue poor. Don't be surprised if you see more of these public infrastructure agencies trying to monetize their assets, and that will open up development opportunities for the private sector.
Tony, I think you're muted.
I'll jump in on some of these major infrastructure projects. We focus a lot on infrastructure projects, whether, you've heard about Moynihan. It's just so exciting for the city. We just opened that one up out at LaGuardia. We did the main terminal, and we love that Delta Airlines is actually investing and building out the rest of it during difficult times, but they're making a long-term investment. And this is all driven, the political side. We're lucky to have, Cuomo, who's a builder. I mean, he gets involved, whether it was, the subways, the airports, all the transportation. He sees that as the future, and it really drives, the city to be the business strength that it is. And now with Schumer taking his leadership role in the Senate, that's really, I think, going to help us get all the funding that we need to support, as Dave was talking about, people like the Port Authority that needs to make the investments and really help them. So, we see it. We've heard announced recently the new bus terminal that's going to get going, and that's needed. It's not like it's a luxury. It's needed to keep us competitive with other cities. And the airports I mentioned before, they need to get going. It's an embarrassment to come into Kennedy now. It's just not the state-of-the-art airport. And we want, not just a national crowd, we want an international crowd coming in and being excited, to get off the plane and, have things like, the air terminals, the transportation to get into the cities. And, you're mentioning Penn Station, it's an embarrassment. And now you see Moynihan across the street, it's even, more of a contrast. So I see these things as a necessity. I see the politicians that are going to make it happen. And we as an industry need to push it. Yes, it creates work for us, but it, makes New York the strong city for the future. So I see this as going forward.
Very good. Yeah, and you hear the public-private partnership again, and that's a term that comes up. And then they've used public-private partnerships. They've used long-term leases for bridges, for roads, and constructing tolls and things like that. So it has worked overseas. So it is definitely something that sounds like is gonna come up here, and there's no reason we can't find a way to make it work here. So now affordable housing, obviously that's a big topic. And I think it's an even bigger topic if we're going to try to have more people come back to work and working locally, and also supporting the people who haven't had it so good and they've been out of work and things like that. So which of the areas in New York do you see as being more prime for these projects? And obviously, you know, what effect do you think they could have on those communities as well as on the economy? Who wants to jump in?
Well, I see affordable housing as being provided throughout all the boroughs. Obviously, there are economics to these projects that might push them towards the so-called outer boroughs because of land costs and development costs. But I think that through policy and regulation, we can do things to support affordable housing in Manhattan as well, and it's important that happen. We have to have vibrant mixed use communities. I think what we've seen in Midtown with the pandemic and the fact that the office buildings that are there are just not being utilized as much anymore. And therefore, there's a big impact on retail, a bigger impact on retail and restaurant owners in Midtown, because only 10% more or less of those offices are being occupied again. If those communities were more mixed use and it was a live, work, play 24/7 area that included affordable housing, the neighborhoods across the city would be so much more vibrant and such a better environment for everyone that I think that's really where we should be going. There are lots of hurdles to that with regulation and zoning and building codes and all that, but it's not insurmountable. And I think it's an objective that we should have push forward.
So I'm not sure what the driver is that is propelling these developers to focus on any one area of the city. But I do see a lot of the desires are being geared towards Queens for one reason or the other. Certainly there's a demand throughout the entire city. Certainly there's a limitation based on land availability in Manhattan, but certainly the Bronx, the Queens, the Brooklyns, and even Staten Island certainly has a opportunity for expansion of affordable housing. We know that there's a lot of low income people who makes a certain, salary, which qualifies them at least to be part of the lottery. And then they go through the qualification process to meet all the other requirements. Certainly, companies like, RXR are looking to expand their portfolio in Queens and other areas of the city. So there's certainly a lot of needs for sure. And, capitalization of making these happening is certainly in the forefront. It's just a matter of, what type of tax credits these developers are going to get to create a balance in their financial portfolio. And does it really make sense for them? NYCHA, again, is constrained by just, having the capital availability for them to satisfy their opportunities to build affordable houses. Certainly, mixed-use buildings are always great. To have, work-life balance is certainly creates a sense of equilibrium across the entire platform. But, there's certainly a need.
Phil, if I could follow that up, Everett's comments there. I actually want to tie it back to our prior topic, which was infrastructure. I was at an Urban Land Institute event probably 20 years ago, and I recall one speaker likening workforce housing to necessary infrastructure. And you might say, well, that's common sense. Well, maybe it's not. You know, I think sometimes people don't view it as infrastructure. But for any society, for any country, for any city to thrive and do well, you've got to have the basic infrastructure. And you need to look at affordable housing as workforce housing, and it's a necessary infrastructure component. As Everett mentioned, I mean, gosh, NYCHA, I think they're estimating they need $40 billion or some crazy number to bring its buildings up to a state of good repair. So they have this aging housing stock that's obviously going to be a great challenge to get to where it needs to get to. And I think they're looking for somewhere around 12 billion from the federal government to help them get there. But you know, it's obviously, you know, high on everybody's agenda. It's been high on de Blasio's agenda. It's another, you know, piece of New York's infrastructure that still has a long way to go, and it's going to need money, time, and resources to get to where it needs to get to.
But NYCHA is really an opportunity because so many of their buildings are on, you know, well underutilized sites. You know, they built the buildings really as towers in the park sort of idea, and there's so much land and so much underutilized FAR on those sites that they could, and they are talking and working with developers, but they could accelerate that and another public-private partnership kind of approach where those NYCHA sites could be densified. The income from those new opportunities could be used to fund the improvements to the existing housing. And I think there's a tremendous opportunity there that just needs to be tapped into.
Okay. I think we have time for one more topic, and then we'll go through a couple of questions. So obviously, energy efficiency is a huge concern. You know, building smart, building safe, making sure the environment is good. What do you see for energy projects for this year? Where do you see the biggest areas to be concentrating on, and what suggestions do you have as far as building smart?
So if I could go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, what we see in the way of energy, and we have a power group, transmission distribution group, actually throughout all New England, and deal with utilities all the time. And what we're seeing is, you know, one is clean energy. You know, 20 years ago, the definition of clean energy was turning a power plant from oil to natural gas. Now no one wants natural gas. And what everybody's looking at is, how do I get clean energy into my project? And it can be solar, it can be wind, it can be battery storage. We just did our first battery installation at the Barclays Center. And everyone's looking at how you integrate. And it's being driven by the governor's new energy plan, and the city, the mayor has his energy plan also. So we're going to see that having to be integrated into every project that goes on. And in the way of power coming in, they're looking at a lot of transmission projects that are going to bring clean energy into New York City. And so those are coming. They've got, you know, some preliminary approval and are starting to you know, percolate, and we're going to see them coming. So it ranges from, you know, the power coming in through transmission to every building project figuring out how they're going to be environmental friendly. And that's what the clients want. Their employees are driving them to be, you know, environmentally friendly. And so they've got to figure out every building how they're going to, you know, be carbon neutral in the future.
I mean, everyone wants to save the environment, and everyone wants to take every opportunity to be sustainable as we grow from generation to generation. But I think what we have to do right now to propel this moving forward is to get everyone educated on why. Why is it important to really move towards this end, and how can we move together towards this end? I think on the peripheral, we're hearing about, energy and energy efficiency, but the reality is the people who are required to step up don't necessarily have the knowledge and understanding the benefits, the long term and some short term, but mostly long term, as to how this is going to not only benefit them, but benefit the economy and benefit the environment. So I think there's a lot of need for education on why, and that needs to be satisfied yesterday, at a minimum today, so we can move forward tomorrow.
Thank you. Dave, I think you were looking to speak.
Yeah, just a couple of thoughts on this. I mean, obviously, the trend toward renewables continues ever stronger. It's been interesting. I mean, we've done solar all over the country, and a lot of people gravitate towards solar when we have this conversation. But the real big news on renewables now is wind energy. And it used to be, where the wind blew, the people weren't, which was the Midwest and the Great Plains. But now with the introduction of offshore wind and Ørsted, who really has, almost a monopoly on some of these offshore projects, we are seeing an enormous number of projects take place, particularly off the coast in the Northeast. And, it's interesting, even if you're not involved in what's going on, offshore, for them to construct all that, they need facilities along the waterfront that often require construction, design, approvals, so that we see a lot of these, and again, they assemble a lot of the mechanical stuff right there on the upland sites. So we're seeing a lot of activity on waterfront sites that were underutilized that are now being put to use. And then the other thing is, once that energy is harnessed, it's got to be brought inland. You need the conveyance systems to get the energy to where it needs to get to. So that's driving a lot of construction jobs. And then finally, we all continue to hear and read a lot about battery storage, and that's the next big chapter in renewables. It's just how far can the lithium ion batteries go? And I think that's where we're going to see a lot of technology that's going to drive this for the next 5 to 10 years.
I know we're short on time, but I'll just throw one quick thing. Everybody's been talking about supply side for the most part here, but we really need to focus and continue to focus on demand side, making buildings more efficient. Local 97 has been put in place. We've got to move it up on implementation and get the utilization of energy at the building side reduced significantly. And that, as Everett said, requires a lot of education for users, but it also requires a lot of education on building owners and developers.